Hello to all of you, my friends. How are you doing? And thanks for being here. Well, this is a special day for us who are Beatle fans, John Lennon fans. I mean, so many different dates in the history of the Beatles and the individual Beatles that are so significant. But October 9th is certainly a day that all of us reflect on, think about when it comes around every year. And I'm no different than the rest of you. It's a special day for me. It's the day that John Lennon was born, October 9th, 1940. And if I seem a little melancholy and nostalgic or reflective, well, there's reason to be that way, and I think you all understand, so I'm not even going to try to explain it, because I don't celebrate the other date. The other date, approximately 2 months from now, that a lot of the news media and music press and whatnot like to highlight and draw attention to every year. They seem to like to glom onto that date as a significant date. And yes, I know it's a significant date for many reasons, but it's not a date that I choose to reflect on. It's not a date that I choose to celebrate. Today is the day I choose to celebrate, and I'm sure I'm speaking to the choir here. I'm sure many of you feel the same way. October 9th is the date for me. That was the date John Lennon was born. And that's a date I want to reflect on a little bit today and pay tribute to John and wish him a happy birthday of what would have been his 79th birthday. Unbelievable, isn't it? 79 years ago, John Winston Lennon was born. And little did he know at that time, as a young boy, of the impact he would have on so many people, on so many lives, the happiness he would bring so many people, the joy that so many of us feel as Beatle fans, as John fans. He had no way of knowing, I'm sure. And I just hope that before he left us, I really hope in his heart and soul he knew or had some inkling of how deep and how meaningful his life and his music career was to so many of us. I just hope he knew that. I think he did, but I just really hope and pray that he did, because he sure had an impact on my life, folks. The Beatles in general, but certainly John. You know, I've gone through phases throughout my whole life of who was my favorite Beatle. You know, there's been times even, I think way back when I was a little boy, it was Paul. When the Beatles were, in the first generation, during the 60s, it was Paul. I remember it being Ringo for a period in my life in the early 70s when I was like, 10, 11, 12 years old. It was Ringo for a while. I know for a period it was George during my high school years. George was my favorite Beatle. When I was a high schooler and just after high school, it was George. And it was Paul again for a while during the 80s and coming into the 90s a little bit. Paul got very active in the touring and releasing albums. So I went back to Paul a little bit as being my favorite Beatle. And I'll have to say, though, in recent years, in the last 10 to 15 years or so, it's been John. John is my favorite Beatle, if you've ever wondered. If I don't want to split hairs and get into a solo career and all that. I mean, obviously, Paul has been the most productive, the most musical, the most, Paul's amazing. Let's be honest. So he's my favorite. Of the four Beatles, he's my favorite during the solo period, obviously. But, that goes without saying. But as far as my favorite Beatle, when the Beatles were the Beatles, it was John. He was the leader of the Beatles. In my mind, he is the Beatles. Not to take away from the other three, I love them all. But John is my favorite. So I thought my way of paying tribute to John here for just a few more minutes, if you'll bear with me, and to recognize him in this day and to wish him a happy 79th birthday wherever he is. And I know he's in a better place with the Lord and with God by his side. I'm sure he's there. in that beautiful place that we all hope to be someday. But I thought I would share some of my memories of John throughout my life that were significant. And some of them are little insignificant things, and some of them were very important to me. I just thought I'd share them with you, and that's my way to pay tribute today. So my first memory of John will be as a young boy. I'm a first generation fan, being a fan since 1964. 3 and 4 year old boy, 3 years old, I remember for sure, in my parents' first apartment, a second floor apartment in Providence, Rhode Island. They were a newly married couple, a couple of years. And I remember being that little boy riding my toy spring horse, and my parents putting on Meet the Beatles and A Hard Day's Night and playing those 2 albums for me till they were worn out, and riding my little toy spring horse till the cows came home. I was bouncing and playing and going back and forth on that little hobby horse with the springs. You know what I'm talking about. Little pinto pony toy. And this album and this album were playing non-stop. And my parents, these are not the originals, by the way, but these are close enough facsimiles to what my parents bought back in the day. And I rode that horse, man. First memory of John and the Beatles. And, John screaming out A Hard Day's Night and Tell Me Why. Man, all those great songs from that period. And I just have such fond memories of that. And my next memory that always sticks out in my head of John is seeing John in the movie Help. When I was a little kid, my mom and dad took me in 1965 to see the movie Help in the theaters. I remember it. I do have memories of it. I don't remember every little detail, but I just remember John falling into his sunken-in bed in the Beatles, house in the movie, home in the movie, I should say. And John just being so witty and so silly and waking up the Beatles with the alarm clock through the phone, and just all the little fun things he did in that film. The other Beatles did also, folks, but the memories of John and his wittiness and being so silly in that movie just strikes me. And I was just a little kid, 4 or 5 years old, but, John really gave me some really fond memories of those days. And funny, years later, I remember when I was 9 or 10, myself and my 2 brothers, my little brothers, and another friend or 2 reenacted scenes from Help in my parents' basement. I can remember doing that, and I remember one of them being the scene in the bathroom. If you all remember that scene, you know what I'm talking about, but we recreated that. Yes, water and all, not as bad, but with like squirt guns and other cups of water and stuff, but I won't go into all that, my dad's still with us, and if he ever heard the mess we made in the basement on that day, he'd probably still flip out. But anyway, we cleaned it up. What a wonderful memory. Another memory I have of John is in the early 70s. It had to be 70 or 71, and I had taken this album out of the library down the street. I didn't have it yet. And myself and my cousin set up fake keyboards. I don't know what he set up on the table to be fake keyboards. And I had some kind of fake guitar. And I distinctly remembering lip syncing to the rockers on this album. And the one in particular I remember for sure is I Found Out. We cranked I Found Out and lip syncing and pretending to play the instruments, and he's going nuts on the keyboard. I don't even know if there's keyboards in. I don't think there is keyboards or anything like that in I Found Out, as we all know. It's just Ringo, Klaus Vorman, and John, right? But we didn't care. I don't think there's keyboards anyway. But we didn't care. He's pretending he's playing keyboards, and I'm thrashing on a fake guitar, and I just, we just thinking about John and what a rocker he was, and that's another fond memory with this album here. Man, a couple of years later, the thrill I get when I think about this album. When this came out, it was such a thrill for me. I was a middle schooler at the time, 7th or 8th grade, I think. And the thrill of this album just struck me when I was young, folks. I mean, John has so many great solo albums. I won't go through all that now, but this one in particular, when it came out, I was at that age, like I said, 12 or 13, middle school age. Number Nine Dream was a big hit. I love that song. It just, at the time, I remember thinking it was very Beatle-y, Number Nine Dream. I remember loving Whatever Gets You Through the Night. And like I said, the same cousin who also did, the I Found Out thing with me and all that stuff, he was a big Elton John fan around this time. So we were all excited that, Elton and John were good friends, and John was, helping Elton. I don't know if we had it yet. We might have, of the single with John doing I Saw Her Standing There at Madison Square Garden with Elton, and Elton doing a cover of Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, and Elton helping on Whatever Gets You Through the Night. It was just that link, that bond between Elton and John and my cousin and I in this period, just so thrilling to me, and just loving what John did with this album, and that excitement of having this album and playing it and loving the hit songs off it. Such wonderful John memories there of that period of my life, 1974. So I remember about a year later or so really digging and enjoying this album and getting into it. And I remember seeing John on the Sir Lou Grade special and having to watch that. And he just looked, in his red jumpsuit with all the zip. I mean, he was way ahead of parachute pants in the 80s. Remember the parachute pants with all the zippers all over the place? Well, here's John wearing a suit that kind of looked like that, with the zippers all over, his hair pulled back, the cool shades, and he's singing, was it Slipping and Sliding and Imagine? And I just love the song Slipping and Sliding. It's one of my favorites on this album, and so exciting of that time period. And again, not knowing he was going to be going into a 5-year semi-retirement at that time, and just being so excited that, with this album coming out, and then this coming out, and loving Slipping and Sliding, and it just, seeing him on that TV special looking so cool, it just drove it home for me, just how, this man had made such a difference in my life with his music and his presence, I just, means so much to me, folks, these memories, and these are just a few memories. Around a little after that, I believe, is when this album came out, later in 75, I believe, and this was a big deal with my friends and I, and like I said, my cousin again, some relatives, but my friends and I loved Shaved Fish. We just loved this album. I mean, this was like the bomb. And is that term still in style now? I know I'm an old fart, but, we just thought this was the coolest thing ever, this album. It just had so many great Lennon tracks on here, and Cold Turkey, which you couldn't get on any album. I don't even think I had the single of Cold Turkey. It just such a wonderful, great album. Happy Christmas is on here. And I just remember being so excited about this and running down to the store, which wasn't far from my house, a little department store, and picking this album up, taking it home. This is my original. And just playing it and playing it. Love this album. Nice John memory. Oh, man. It's just, what a day to celebrate this wonderful, wonderful musician and peacemaker and person. I'll tell you, it's hitting me, folks. A few years later, as we know, John went into a retirement for a few years, and I remember, reading little bits and pieces in the paper about what he was up to, and you all remember the article about Yoko selling cows and doing the business while John's home and all that. I remember little articles like that coming out, but there really wasn't too much. You might catch a little piece on the news about him. I remember there was something about doing something. He was Geraldo Rivera, and he was at the circus and being interviewed by Geraldo, where he was there with his family, and at the Ringling Brothers Circus, there was something, a piece about that, and it just nice little things that he was up to with his family, and kind of calming his life down and getting into a more relaxed pace, and raising Sean and being with Yoko, and just nice 5 years for him. I mean, sadly, I wish we'd gotten some music out of him during those 5 years, but he was still writing, he was still doing little home demos, as we now know. But at the time, we missed John. We missed seeing him and having him around and making his great music. So when this album was announced it was coming, man, I was so happy, so pumped up for what was coming. I was in the service overseas in England at the time, as a matter of fact. I had served 2 years over in the UK. And when it was announced this was coming out, myself, my friends and roommates over there, and dorm mates and stuff, guys I worked with, were very excited about this. All the Beatles fans and John Lennon fans couldn't wait for this album to come out. And this was the one I got at Fast for Beatle Fans, signed by Jack Douglas. This is my original. I bought it over in England, and I'm so happy to have it. And the memories of that and starting over when I first heard it. I mean, you can say good or bad about starting over, overproduced or whatever. But at the time, folks, as a young 18 or 19-year-old, whatever I was, and hearing that song and having that 50s rock and roll vibe to it, kind of taking John back to his roots, you know, the music he loved so much. And we now hear later on Double Fantasy Stripped Down how it was for Buddy. This is for Buddy, this is for Elvis. And who else did he say it was for? I forget now. But remember, he said, oh, this one's for Elvis and for Buddy and Carl Perkins or whoever. I can't remember right now. But anyway, you know what I'm getting at. He just, you know, so much excitement about this and so much joy that John was back. He's back, we said. He's back. He's back with a vengeance, you know. And whether you love this album or you don't care for it too much, it was the promise of the future. Regardless of what this was or wasn't to you, what was to come. That was the thrill. We love this, and there's so many things about this album, and John's songs especially, that I love, but it was the hope for the future. The joy of knowing what could be coming soon and what could be happening in the world of John Lennon. It just was so exciting. And again, I'm not going to speak about you know, what happened in December of 1980. It's just not something I really wish to touch upon on this joyous birthday of John Lennon. But I remember getting very excited about this album as well. When it was coming out, I was just so happy that we would have some more music from John. We would have something. You know, it may not be perfectly what we would have liked to have from John, but it was something. It was something to hold close to us and to our heart and to our soul, and just say, thank you, John. Thank you, Yoko, for giving us a little more, just a little bit more of John, just something we could hold on to. And for that, this album just gives me fond memories of that period of the year 84. It was a year when I was engaged to be married to my now wife, and we used the song Grow Old With Me at my wedding. Yes, it was played in the church, among other songs, but it was one of the songs featured in the church at our wedding in 1985. And that will always be a special memory I'll hold in my heart, folks. Always be a special memory. So, with that, I'm going to let you go. I just wanted to give some memories of John in my life, little snapshots of moments in my life where John made a difference. He's always makes a difference in my life. Whenever I listen to Beatles music or his solo music, it lifts me up. It makes me feel better. And it gives me hope that he's in a wonderful place right now. And we know what that place is. And for those of you that are in that mindset as I am, that he's with our Lord Jesus and he's seeing the glory and he's living it, and he's with his lost friends, family, and loved ones, and they're embracing him and holding them close to them, holding him close to them. I'm sorry, folks, I'm getting a little bit choked up here. But thank you, John. Happy birthday to you, my friend. Thank you for all you've done for me. And to all of you, thank you for being part of this little video. God bless. Bye-bye.